Hello and welcome to another episode of the CIRS Group Podcast. I'm JC.
And I'm Barbara.
And today we are going over some more of the CIRSx talks. CIRSx is the mold conference we went to last month and were exposed to mold there, but that's another story for another day. Today we're talking about the patient-facing talks. So these are more patient tools. One was an amazing talk, which I missed and I'm very sad about, but I did watch the recap of Breathwork by Morgan Glodowski. And then another one about creating healing momentum by Jenny Johnson and Jane Prescott. They are like the OG CIRS coaches. Also, a really great talk about litigating CIRS, or not CIRS, but like the people who got you into the CIRS mess by having bad building practices, etc. And that was by Kristina Baehr.
Yep.
And then finally, Raising the Bar, which was a talk by Bob McKee. He's like the CIRS lawyer. Like if I were suing someone over having a moldy house, I would hire that man so fast. But before we jump into any of those talks, just a reminder, we are not medical professionals. We are CIRS patients. We've read the textbook. We have a community of people who are healing from CIRS, but none of this is to be taken as medical advice.
Or legal advice today.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Or breathing advice.
Or coaching advice.
But do breathe. But do breathe.
Yeah, I mean, you can follow that one. So, yeah, so I'll take the first one with the breathwork talk by Morgan. That was really great. I mean, she led us through the whole room. She led us through a one round, and she did clarify that ideally I believe it would be 3 rounds. It would take much longer, but she was limited on time. She also wanted to kind of explain the benefits and the whys behind it as well, which I'll get into. But it was interesting because there was a lot of like quick breathing, deep breathing, holding your breath shortly. If you've ever taken a yoga class, there are elements of that type of breathing. I think she did reference Ujjayi breath, or like that ocean where you kind of constrict and you almost sound like Darth Vader a little bit, the way that you breathe in and out, or mostly out, I think. She's the breathwork person. Go to her if you want to actually do this, by the way. I'm just giving you some descriptors. But yeah, it reminded me of yoga, but like obviously we're not moving around, we're just doing the breathing part. And the breath part actually is the hard part for me when it comes to yoga. So it really made me think that I needed to look into some breath work guidance myself. And Morgan does do that. So we'll link her information in the show notes. I was really impressed with some of the facts that she laid out, that it's used in adjunct therapy with PTSD, trauma work, anxiety, drug abuse cases, and like inmates. So people who've gotten in trouble with the law, maybe they're substance abuse users, a lot of that, they can follow breath work in conjunction with their other therapies, and it really makes a big difference. That difference specifically is people experience antidepressant effects. There's an inflammatory cytokines decrease, so it's bringing down inflammation. There is a lower vigilance of mast cell overreaction. And again, these are tested. She actually showed research that shows a lot of this, like before and after. And again, the breath work is not alone. You're not doing the Shoemaker protocol and doing breath work and like seeing these benefits necessarily. It's all kind of like working together towards the same goal. It's a way to kind of boost what you're already doing if this is a practice that is attracting you. If you are listening to me talk about breath work and going, that seems dumb, I mean, try it. But if you're not
breathing,
try breathing.
Just try breathing. Why not?
But if you try it and you like, I don't know, it just doesn't do anything for you, then okay, that's not the modality for you. And, meditation is hard for some people, and yet there are definitely benefits to meditating. But like for me, I've always really struggled with meditation myself. So everyone, figure out what works best for you. But what I did find really cool is that studies show similar changes and improvements in the brain with breath work as shown in psychedelic therapies. So if you're like, man, I'd like to try shrooms to heal, but like you don't have easy access to it, you might want to go the breathwork route first because you might get some of those same benefits at the end of the day, which is pretty cool. I do say that specifically for you, JC, because I know you are interested in that. And they actually, there's brainwave studies that have been done before and after to show the improvements on the brain with this practice, in addition to, of course, objective observations. Patients just, reflecting on how they feel and all of that. So yeah, it was a really great talk. I love that she actually led us through the breath work itself. And I definitely encourage people to look into it if it's a modality you want to experiment with.
And while I didn't get to see her talk, I did end up connecting with Morgan at various points throughout the conference. And I learned that she's traditionally trained in like yoga practice breath work. But I think that as kind of a point of reference for something people might be more familiar with, Wim Hof, the Wim Hof breathing method comes from these same traditional yogi practices in breath work. So if you're familiar with Wim Hof and you're sold on Wim Hof, but you're like, this breath work stuff sounds weird, it's the same thing. It's like that meme of Pam, it's the same picture. So just putting that out there too, because I found that very interesting when I connected with her at the conference.
Yeah, and I didn't say this before, probably because I was like, I'm going to say this wrong. But if you want to Google it, and I can put it in the show notes in case I say it wrong, but it's Sudarshan Kriya breathwork is what she's practicing and championing right now. And so that's what you can Google and do some research on if you're curious.
And the next talk was Creating Healing Momentum by Jenny Johnson and Jane Prescott. They are both CIRS coaches, so they work with CIRS patients in tandem with a provider typically in order to get them through the protocol. But the big takeaway from this was like, if you can create momentum early on in your CIRS treatment, it prevents you from becoming a long CIRS case. The typical healing time from the Shoemaker protocol is 12 to 18 months. And I would say that's an optimistic timeline. That's like if you do everything perfectly and don't have very many setbacks along the way, because a lot of us find that we're in this for a couple of years. And their point is the more momentum you can create at the start of treatment, the faster you can get through treatment and the less tedious the treatment will be over time.
Yeah. And a big thing that I pulled from it too is that you really want to seriously consider getting a CIRS coach, having one on your team. You don't have to meet with them all the time. It's not, work with them and figure out what works for you. But especially if you are a complex case, there's just so many pieces to unravel and figure out priorities on things, figure out your next step. To have somebody who has, one, most likely been through it. Generally speaking, CIRS coaches have CIRS themselves. And two, they are not in the midst of healing the way you are. Preferably, they are past it. They are healed, so they can objectively look at your situation. Also, look at your doctor's notes with you and like help you make sense of them. Make sure you understand what the doctor was telling you and make sure you can actually take what you were told and implement it in a way that is also meeting you where you are. If you have certain limitations on where you can move, whether it's resources or you're living with your family or you're sensitive to everything, like anything and everything it seems like you're sensitive to, the coach can take your specific limitations and help you dig that path. What metaphor am I going for there? But help you find your way through all of that stuff to get to healing, despite all of the complexities and all the other things that are going on. And I really think, especially with how the doctors are stretched a bit thin these days, there's usually a pretty big wait list to see one for the first time. Even me, when I see my doctor, there's 2 to 3 months of time in between visits. A coach can potentially bridge that gap. And when I say coach, I also could mean groups. And, shameless plug, yes, we have a group, the CIRS group. But that's another way to kind of bridge that gap and still get the support that you need in between your doctor's appointments without necessarily paying your doctor's appointment prices for that kind of support.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people will relate to this. When you are really in CIRS, like when you're really in it and you have that CIRS brain and everything feels really overwhelming and you have this 12-step protocol in front of you and you're not sure which step to take next, it's like borrowing a non-CIRS brain, right? Like you
Yeah.
get to borrow that coach's brain who has more experience than you do, who has clarity that you don't, and be able to kind of run all of your information through that person so that they can give you those really easy outputs of next steps to take. And if you are looking for a CIRS coach, Jenny Johnson and Jane Prescott, and Jane is located in Canada for all of our Canadian listeners. Hey, definitely consider working with them. If you go to survivingmold.com, all the proficiency partners are listed there. There's also really amazing CIRS communities out there. There's the CIRS group, obviously. There's also CIRS Lab. Judy Cho from Nutrition with Judy has one as well. There are a lot of options out there, and you deserve to have support through this. I know a lot of people don't have family members on board necessarily, but you deserve to have support through this. So if you have to find that for yourself, I would just really encourage you to do that because, I mean, Barbara, having you in my CIRS journey has made all the difference.
And absolutely likewise. I wouldn't be here without you. So, yeah, find that for yourself for sure, guys. And I'm glad you mentioned Judy Cho because I know her group and her mind body group is has a big focus on kind of bringing down the noise and like calming the limbic system. She even says like maybe if you're getting overwhelmed with a lot of CIRS information, especially when you're new to it, you may want to like stop researching, not to stay ignorant, obviously, but just to kind of give your brain and your system time to like process and not freak out. That's another benefit to borrowing a brain of someone else. You can trust your CIRS coach to be that brain for you. They know what's required by the Shoemaker protocol. They know all of those things. They can, they can maybe read your doctor's notes for you if you want them to, all of that stuff. So they can put that together for you so that you don't have to place the burden of research on yourself on top of everything else. So that's another element of benefit of having a coach. The biggest takeaway, though, from that talk that I want to make sure I repeat that they said was that hope is the biggest correlation with patients' ability to heal. And that goes back to, having hope, surrounding yourself with supportive people as much as you can. Again, that's why these groups and coaching and all of that exist. It is a way to create that community for you and to watch other people heal so that you know that it's possible to reinforce that idea in yourself. And it's going to make your healing go that much better as well. And for those of you listening who are interested in becoming a CIRS coach yourself, the big announcement they made at CIRSx is that there is now a CIRS coaching training available. So I can put the link in the show notes for that as well. It is designed to go in conjunction with the survivingmold.com proficiency partner program. You would want both to be your fully equipped and proficient CIRS coach. But I definitely wanted to mention that in case anyone was interested, because that was a very exciting announcement that happened right then and there that weekend.
Yeah, like literally that weekend, I think it was after they presented and it was the panel discussion later that night. They were like, oh, the coaching program is live.
Yeah.
The next talk, which I found so fascinating, and I like nudged Barbara at one point during the talk because I was like, "You're so into this, aren't you?" And she's like, "Yeah." It was Litigating for CIRS, by Kristina Baehr, and she is a lawyer. She used to be a defense lawyer for the government, so like when people would sue the government, she would defend the government. But now she works on personal injury cases like her own. She had like a $4 million settlement on the shoddy building practices that made her home so moldy. And she shared just like heartbreaking photos of like, and this was a point in her talk too, was like, if you are going to litigate for CIRS, take a lot of pictures. And the reason she said that was juries are really moved by what they can see. And so she showed us a picture of her kids like sitting on their bed right next to a picture of behind that wall. And it was just black mold. That was a really powerful image. When it's kids, it kills me.
Oh, no, yep, every time. Every time. It is wild that like I don't know. It's the whole developmental thing. And like, I don't know. There's just it's just so not fair. And I'm so glad she won her case. Like, I'm so glad because that's such a wonderful precedent to set. And I'm sure, she wasn't the first ever, but like that's the work that she's doing now. Um, a big thing that she said is that when she was struggling, she called so many attorneys and nobody took her case at first. And she was realizing that she had to kind of do it herself. She did end up working with attorney Bob McKee, which we'll talk about next because he's the next talk we'll cover. But yeah, that was powerful, and that has given her the motivation that she will take your call. If you're interested in potentially pursuing litigation, she will take your call. She will listen to you, and then she or her team will refer you to someone in your state if she can't take your case. But that is what she has made her mission because she was not listened to. She wants to make sure anyone who calls her is listened to. So I thought that was incredible of her as a human being, but certainly as an attorney as well.
Yeah. And a big point of her talk was that, like, aside from the compensation that is due to you, like if your home was poorly built or maintenance people did something wrong and it caused your home to become moldy and then you were exposed to that, like someone should be responsible for that. But beyond that, it's important for CIRS cases to go through litigation because that's how we get insurance companies to do better. And if insurance companies have higher standards, then building practices will have higher standards. So if you've been kind of on the fence about litigating, you weren't sure if you could or should, like Barbara said, Just Well Law, we'll have all the links down below. That's the name of her practice. They'll either help you or refer you to someone who can help you. And her whole point was like, we need to take a stand and say, never again. Never again does this get to happen to anyone else's kids.
Yeah. And to that point, she was describing, she was talking to attorneys at this point in her talk, but this is good for anyone to hear. How do you identify a winnable case? So there are, unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at it. And the reason JC nudged me during this talk is I worked in the legal field for about 5 years, employment law specifically, but on the plaintiff side. So I'm very in tune with a lot of these things. You do need to be, stupid things like you need to be likable to a jury. And I will get into that more with Bob McKee's talk later. But the other factors that she was bringing up from personal experience is that if you want to have a winnable case in front of a jury, you want to show that it can happen again, it can happen to anyone, and it's a community problem. You want the jury to see their kids in your kids' pictures. Like you want them to identify with the struggle that you went through and to show them. In her case, it was like one wire wasn't connected properly in her HVAC system. And that caused the dehumidifying process never to occur. And that's what caused a huge amount of the problems that she experienced. That one little negligent act could happen to anyone who hires anybody to do anything in their house. And so that's the kind of thing that you want to be able to point to during the trial to show and really to make sure that jurors realize that this is something that needs to be punished so that people take it more seriously and prevent it from happening again in the future. And then on that note, she switched to talking to patients. And if you're a patient listening to this, what do you need to consider about whether or not you should pursue litigation? What you'll need to do to make sure that you have like an airtight case, which is a funny metaphor given mold. You do need a doctor and an inspector, both willing to testify as expert witnesses. Talk to your a lot of the CIRS doctors are getting into this because this is unfortunately a part of the deal now because a lot of the mold and the issues in buildings are not the homeowner's fault, someone else's fault for the way they built it or the way they handled an issue. So you do want to hire a certified mold inspector to yourself. You hire one to test your home. Don't ask your landlord or someone else to hire one. You want to get those tests done yourself to make sure they're done properly. Go back to our previous episode where we talk a little bit more about that. I can link it in the show notes. Reach out to Kristina's office. We'll link that in the show notes as well, and she will refer you if needed. Like I mentioned before, if you're not in one of her states that she can practice law in, find a doctor if you haven't already to start building your case. Make sure that doctor is like on board with the legal process. You're going to probably do more blood work. You're going to probably do more testing. This isn't a financial investment up front to be able to build that case and prove it in court later. And of course, JC already touched on this, document everything. Pictures can make or break. You want to show the worst of the worst. You want them to be powerful. You want to show the proximity to the kid's bedroom. Like you want to show things like that for sure, because you do. And this isn't embellishment. It's just showing, you want to really show the damage that has been done by this negligence, potentially, allegedly, using all the legal words.
Allegedly. It was an amazing talk though, and she unfortunately wasn't able to be at CIRSx because she was in Hawaii helping litigate a case about contaminated water. Like, again, another badass woman I want to be when I grow up.
Yeah, she's awesome. I got a fantastic feeling from her just, listening to her talk, and definitely encourage you guys to reach out if that's something that you want to pursue or at least entertain.
Continuing on in the lawyer speak, we had the next talk by Bob McKee, who is the CIRS lawyer. And his talk was about raising the bar, and it started with a sketch. They had a
I think an improvised sketch.
Yeah, it was like a little skit. It was Dr. Scott McMahon playing as the patient and Morgan Glodowski as the practitioner. Oh, sorry, no, it was Bob McKee was the patient.
Mhm.
Dr. Scott McMahon was the lawyer, and then Morgan Glodowski was the practitioner. And they kind of went through what it's like to be a patient trying to get your doctor and lawyer on board with your CIRS case. It was interesting.
Yeah, it was powerful in moments, it was uncomfortable in moments, and it certainly stuck with you, at least for me. Absolutely. And I think that was his goal for doing it that way. He did at some point kind of resolve that, but what he was showing, I think his goal with that reenactment is he was reenacting like what his patients go through, some of the worst. I mean, the patient he was playing, it was a really severe case that he was portraying, and very emotional. Kids were involved. Like it was a really sad case, but he speaks with such passion and conviction and such experience as well. He knows what will win a case, and he is determined to make that happen for his clients. He's like that stereotypical bulldog of an attorney. Like he will not, like I feel like a commercial, but he will not rest until you get your money. But like he's just a very he's just a very intense, convicted guy. And it was a powerful and informational talk.
Yeah, so one of the things he said that surprised me a lot was he said he loves it when insurance denies claims because then he can go after them. Most insurance policies have like a puny little mold clause, and they very often deny it. And if they deny it, then you can go for the exception for harm, meaning if you can prove that the mold harmed you, the insurance policy has to pay in full. So it's not that puny little mold piece anymore. It's the full amount of anything they could cover, and very often more. If you hire Bob McKee, it seems like.
Right. Those punitive damages are they'll get you. And I thought it was interesting. I mean, I'm not surprised by this, but I hadn't heard the statute of limitations on these cases. And it is going to vary by state, but it's a 2 to 4 year statute of limitations from the knowledge of mold. So this could have happened 20 years ago, but if you just found out that, oh, that was mold, that is when your clock starts ticking, so to speak. So that's cool, but not a lot of time to act, obviously, as well.
And my understanding of that was it wasn't necessarily from the time you pinpoint the mold, but the time that you understand that the mold can harm you.
Yes, thank you for clarifying. Yes,
it's
that's true.
not when you first see the mold, because I think a lot of us have that experience being like, oh, there's mold in the bathroom, I'll just clean that up and then be fine for the rest of my life. And then you're not. But if you, for example, if you found out about CIRS last year and you found out that the mold is still harming you last year, that's when the statute of limitations starts.
And then on that note, the proof of toxicity requires dose and duration. He hammered that home quite a bit. And that's why he, MSQ PCR tests, which is a fancy way of saying the dust test, the ERMI and the Hertz Me Too. Yes, we all love those tests because they are showing kind of like real, they're more accurate. They're much more accurate and they're showing you way more of the picture of what's going on in your home than an air test. However, a lot of people, especially jurors, and JC mentioned this, I think, in a previous episode, they need to be able to comprehend the inhalation of the mold particles. And that's why an air sample in this situation is not just nice to have, it's necessary. And you do want to capture the mold in a normal environment. What I mean by that is, a room, if you are normally in there with your whole family and the dog, bring the whole family and the dog into that room while you're testing the air. Like you want the movement, you want a normal life reenactment to get the most accurate result with that air sample. And that is going to show, that is just a really easy thing for an attorney like Bob McKee to use as an illustrator to show the mold actually floating around in your face.
One of my favorite things he said is, so to me, I always thought of the jury relationship as kind of combative, like you're trying to convince them of your harm, but it's more like you're trying to convince them that they could be harmed. You're trying to convince the jury, again, that this could happen to anyone, it could happen to them. And so he said, jury, your job is to tell your community what it is like to be trapped in your own home. And I was just like, that's powerful. That's really powerful, because I know that we all know. If you're listening to this podcast, I know you know what it's like to feel trapped because of mold. And what these lawyers are doing is exemplifying that to the jury so they can have that empathetic understanding of what you went through and what is their potential future. And then making the insurance companies pay. Because if the insurance companies have to pay, they're going to get really annoyed. And then building practices will get better because they're not going to insure buildings unless they're built correctly.
It's a beautiful, annoying thing, but when it is implemented and it all works the way it should, that's the way we get this corrected. But yeah, that is powerful. And that was a question later in the Q&A that day of like, who is being sued in these situations? And often it is an insurance company thing. But in the case of Kristina's case that we just talked about before, it was the HVAC company that installed the HVAC system in that particular moment because they were able to prove a wire was not installed and they were negligent in that. So like there's somebody at fault. So that leads me into an interesting point that I learned about selling your house. A lot of people are kind of scared to get their house tested because they would need to disclose that to a future buyer as part of the full disclosures, like legally you're bound to do that. And that can impact the value of your home. His advice, if you have a good case, if you can identify where the problem came from, if it has a person or a company responsible for it, if you sell your house at a loss because of the disclosure of mold, you can sue for the loss that you take selling it for less. That can be part of your damages when the time comes to sue. Again, talk to an attorney before you make any decisions based on what you're hearing me say right now. This is not legal advice, but I thought that was a really interesting thing that people can maybe look into the option of doing. If you are a little bit worried about, oh, now my house has a scarlet letter on it that says mold, so that's a good thing to think about. And for more resources, tips, and of course, a loving and supportive community, come hang out with us over at the CIRSgroup.com.
We'll see you there.